They played the system and faked the unimaginable just to secure the bag. They literally robbed the most vulnerable people on Earth for a piece of gold. 10 guys in absolute peak physical condition, 10 absolute units with zero health issues decided to play brain dead for a paycheck. This goes way beyond your average hustle or petty scam. This is hands down the most foul play in the history of competitive sports. A massive slap in the face to basic human decency. An absolute crime against compassion. Picture this: Sydney, the year 2000. The grand finale of the Paralympic Games. The stadium is packed to the absolute brim. The crowd is going absolutely feral with excitement. 18,000 fans are up on their feet. You can literally cut the tension with a knife as victory hangs in the air. Grown men and women are bawling their eyes out in the stands. They think they are witnessing the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. They believe they are watching the impossible unfold. Down on the polished hardwood stands the Spanish national basketball squad. 12 dudes in bright red jerseys are hugging it out. They are bouncing off the walls with crazy hype. They are throwing their hands up to the heavens. They just swept the floor with their opponents and took home the championship. Heavy gold medals are hanging around their thick necks. The Spanish flag is slowly rising up to the arena rafters. A spine-chilling national anthem echoes through the speakers. Journalists are snapping hundreds of heartwarming pictures. Camera flashes are lighting up the faces of the newly crowned champs. The crowd is giving a wild standing ovation. Folks in wheelchairs are wiping away tears of pure joy. Visually impaired fans are screaming their lungs out in support. Everyone bought into this beautiful fairy tale without a single doubt. But right under their noses, the most wicked and cynical illusion in human history was playing out. The guys standing on that podium are as healthy as horses. Their brains function perfectly fine. They have the stamina of wild dogs and the coordination of pro ballers. Their reflexes are razor sharp. They are sharp-witted and incredibly greedy opportunists. They stand there on the top step looking down at the cheering masses. They are trying so hard not to bust out laughing. They know their incredibly dirty secret. They just pulled off a cold-blooded heist against people who actually struggle every single day. They snatched away their well-deserved glory. They robbed them of pride that took years of sweat and tears to build. They completely stomped on the very concept of fair play. Why would anyone sink so low? The answer makes you sick to your stomach because it is so basic. Greed. Just raw and unfiltered greed. The sports world is always drowning in massive cash flow, and this arena was definitely no exception. The Spanish Federation for Athletes with Intellectual Disabilities wanted to secure the bag. They were desperate for those juicy new sponsorship deals. They were thirsty for massive government grants. They needed tens of millions of pesetas in their pockets. Bringing home the hardware from an international stage meant infinite money glitches. A shiny gold medal was the ultimate pass to high-level government offices. Every single win stuffed the pockets of these shady executives with fat bonuses. The suits at the top wanted the baller lifestyle. They wanted to cruise in luxury vehicles. They wanted to flex in designer clothing. But they hit a massive roadblock. Their actual team was completely washed. The real Spanish players with genuine cognitive issues were honestly just not good enough at the game. They kept taking heavy losses at major tournaments. They could not guarantee a flawless run for the gold. Their skill level was just way too low for the global stage. So the bigwigs cooked up a genuinely demonic scheme. Why waste years grinding and training people who actually need help? Why invest time into the real disabled community? That takes too long and costs too much money and effort. They decided to take the ultimate shortcut. They figured they could just recruit fully capable athletes. They could easily buy them fake medical records. They could just finesse the entire planet. The bureaucratic machine started doing its dirty work. These sports executives hit up local street courts and amateur leagues. They were scouting for tall guys who could jump out of the gym and shoot lights out. They would roll up on these street ballers after regular pickup games. They pulled them aside into the shadows. They offered them a literal deal with the devil. The perks were honestly insane. A totally free, all-inclusive trip down under to Australia. Chilling in the most luxurious 5-star hotels. Fat stacks of daily spending money in hard cash. Premium gear paid for by the taxpayers. A one-way ticket into the sports history books. And the catch was incredibly stupid. They just had to act like they had severe brain damage. The suits quickly rounded up 10 volunteers. 10 absolute scumbags agreed to this trashy deal without blinking an eye. Not a single one of them pushed back. Not a single one of them listened to their conscience. Then the craziest bureaucratic circus kicked off. The whole medical screening process was purely surreal. Doctors were legally required to test the intelligence of every single roster member. The cutoff line to get into the tournament was extremely strict. The official score of a player could not be higher than 70 points under any circumstances. That is the official medical baseline for mild cognitive impairment. Fully grown adult men walked into these brightly lit clinical offices. Guys in their 30s were putting on the cheapest acting gig of their lives. They were literally forcing themselves to drool on the desk of the doctor. They grunted like cavemen when asked basic, everyday questions. They purposefully messed up children puzzle blocks. They pretended they could not even spell their own names. They stared at the mental health professionals with blank, zombie eyes. They acted like they had zero clue what basic words meant. The doctors saw right through this garbage acting. Veteran physicians knew exactly what kind of scam was going down. You can instantly spot a healthy guy faking it, but they all kept their mouths shut like cowards. The whole system was drowning in pitch-black corruption. Fat envelopes stuffed with cash magically made all those pesky moral dilemmas disappear. Official state stamps were slammed onto paperwork without a second glance. Medical charts were hastily scribbled with completely fabricated diseases. The Federation got all their required documents stamped and approved in record time. 10 completely healthy dudes were now legally classified as disabled. To cover their tracks, this gang of con artists threw in 2 actual guys with real conditions. 2 completely clueless players were dragged along just to be used as human meat shields. They were nothing but a smokescreen for this filthy operation. The roster was locked in. The engine of deceit was running at max capacity. Right before the huge flight to Sydney, they set up a training camp. The sports complex was located in a beautiful suburb right outside Madrid. The fake players rolled up in their own high-horsepower sports cars. They blasted loud, trendy music. They chugged cold beers every single night. They treated the whole thing like a cheap spring break party. Meanwhile, the real disabled players arrived on busted old buses with their caretakers. The real guys obediently went to sleep on a strict schedule. The healthy scammers sneaked out to local nightclubs in the dark. They laughed their heads off at the concept of a sports regimen. They did not even try to hide how much they looked down on the sick players. They constantly bragged about what they would buy with their future prize money. One dude wanted a brand new sports motorcycle. Another was obsessing over a luxury vacation to a tropical island. A third guy just wanted to wipe out his shady gambling debts. None of them cared about representing their country. None of them felt even a tiny drop of guilt. It was just a super easy side hustle for them. Fast cash built entirely on the horrific suffering of another person. The Spanish squad flew first class to sunny Australia. They checked into the massive Olympic Village. Every single day, they walked into the giant main dining hall alongside the real athletes. They stared dead in the eyes of incredibly strong-willed people missing arms and legs. They saw athletes battling severe syndromes. They saw blind swimmers being guided by service dogs. They saw totally paralyzed runners navigating wheelchairs. And these jacked scammers felt zero shame. They maliciously snickered and cracked jokes right behind their backs. Finally, the highly anticipated tournament tipped off. Just picture that very first group stage matchup. The opposing team awkwardly rolled out for the pre-game warm-up. They were super short. A lot of them had extremely obvious physical limitations. Some of the guys could not even stand up straight to save their lives. And then, the Spanish squad aggressively stormed the court. Towering giants with broad shoulders and massive muscles. They started running advanced professional stretching routines. They were effortlessly catching major air and touching the rim. The referees watched this go down with super heavy suspicion. But all the stamped paperwork checked out perfectly. You just cannot argue with a wall of blind bureaucracy. The head ref blew the whistle and the massacre began. The opening games instantly turned into a total bloodbath. Grown athletic men were violently bullying weak and sick people on the hardwood. The skill gap was completely insane. The Spanish players were zooming around the wooden floor like hungry cheetahs. The actual disabled guys from the other countries could barely turn their heads fast enough to track the ball. It was a totally one-sided beatdown. It was a public mockery of common sense. The Spanish squad was throwing down massive two-handed dunks. They hung on the metal rims just to flex. They were dishing out crazy passes without even looking at each other. They stole every single ball from their helpless opponents in the blink of an eye. They brutally crushed other nations by 30 or 40 or even 50 points. They mercilessly wiped the floor with the Chinese squad. They literally tore the Portuguese team to absolute shreds. The players on the other side were breaking down in tears from total helplessness right there on the court. They collapsed onto the hard floor from insane exhaustion. They scraped their knees until they bled. They fought with everything they had for every single inch of the court. But they were up against ruthless cyborgs. The healthy guys did not even break a sweat during these blowouts. They were casually chatting and cracking jokes mid-game. They were openly disrespecting sick people. Rival coaches started asking some really spicy questions. They were nervously pointing their fingers at the Spanish bench. They were screaming at the refs about this obvious fraud. A gigantic global scandal was slowly brewing. The whole situation was rapidly going off the rails. And then the most legendary moment of absolute cringe in sports history happened. The Spanish team was playing another crucial match against the Russian squad. The score on the board was skyrocketing at warp speed. The Spanish guys were chilling while holding a monumental lead. The real disabled players from the Russian side were struggling just across half court. The crowd started booing heavily. The fans trusted their gut and realized this was a massive scam. The audience could clearly see fast-paced pro hoops instead of a slow amateur game. The head coach of the Spanish team suddenly realized they were about to get totally exposed. He panicked and called an emergency minute-long timeout. The players swaggered over to the bench looking completely bored. They were not even breathing heavily. The coach instantly turned purple with absolute uncontrollable rage. He was definitely not hyping them up for playing well. He was freaking out and cursing them out at the top of his lungs. He violently ordered them to hit the brakes right now. He demanded that they start playing like absolute garbage. He was screaming profanities right into their faces. He yelled at them to stop scoring and asked if they had lost their minds because everyone was watching them. He gave them strict orders to intentionally brick their shots. He told them to purposely fumble the ball out of bounds for no reason. He begged them to stumble around like fools and take fake dives on the floor. If they did not comply, the whole world would instantly figure out their dirty little secrets. The players obediently walked back out under the bright arena lights. And so began the most nauseating and pathetic circus act ever broadcasted. These agile pros started deliberately throwing the ball far out of bounds. They aggressively tripped over their own massive feet. They threw goofy air balls that hit the side of the backboard. They made incredibly stupid faces for the television cameras. They cynically put on a comedy sketch right in front of thousands of confused fans. It was an incredibly pathetic and shameful thing to watch. It was the ultimate degradation of everything sports stand for. But somehow, this disgusting, rehearsed play actually worked out for them. The referees chickened out and did absolutely nothing about it. The Spanish team cruised all the way to the grand finals. In the ultimate showdown, they crushed their opponents one last time. They predictably secured the gold hardware. They happily hoisted the championship trophy high above their heads. They successfully played the entire globe. But there was one massive, fatal flaw in this supposed master plan. They had a secret mole chilling in the locker room. Or, honestly, he was just the only decent human being in a sea of absolute trash. His name was Carlos Ribagorda. He was an undercover investigative journalist doing the work of the heavens. He knew about this massive con job from the very beginning of the training camp. He made a rock-solid promise to himself to blow the lid off this rotten system from the inside out. Carlos successfully infiltrated the basketball squad as a regular bench warmer. He went through that exact same hilarious fake medical checkup. He boarded the flight to Sydney with the rest of the crew. He actually stepped onto the court and played in those embarrassing matchups. He sat right next to them in the cramped, sweaty locker rooms. He closely listened to their vile jokes about the actual disabled athletes. He clearly saw the insane greed shining in their eyes. He secretly recorded every single word they said on a hidden wire. He meticulously gathered airtight concrete evidence to nail them to the wall. He snapped secret photos of private medical files in the dead of night. He memorized the full names of every single corrupt executive involved. It made Carlos physically sick to his stomach to breathe the same air as these monsters. He spent hours scrubbing the shame off his skin in the tiny locker room showers. He wanted to scream his lungs out at the sheer injustice of it all, but he bit his tongue and suffered in silence, just so the truth could see the light of day. Carlos did not just want to write a quick clickbait piece. He pulled off an absolutely massive and dangerous undercover operation. He compiled a ridiculously huge file on every single rat involved in this conspiracy. He tracked down the exact amateur leagues where these frauds actually played. He dug up real photos of them competing in totally normal city tournaments. He printed out their legit stat sheets from healthy basketball associations. He had a royal flush of undeniable proof in his hands. The journalist preemptively mailed copies of his explosive investigation to the police. He blasted the files out to international sporting committees. He wanted to make absolutely sure this story could not get swept under the rug. He knew for a fact the suits would try to buy his silence, and they actually did try to slide him massive dirty bribes later on. He got totally unhinged death threats over his home phone. Shady dudes in dark clothes stalked him outside his office building late at night. But Carlos was built different. He fearlessly pushed forward until the very bitter end. The games wrapped up with a massive fake victory party. The squad flew back home to sunny Madrid. The sports officials were already rubbing their hands together, ready to split millions in sponsor cash. And right at that exact moment, Carlos dropped the absolute hammer. He hit the publish button. He dropped a gigantic, devastating exposé in the most popular magazine in the country. The fallout was wilder than anyone could have ever predicted. It was a literal nuclear bomb going off in the media landscape. The brave journalist threw all his trump cards right on the table. He named and shamed every single one of the 10 fake players. He ruthlessly posted their actual clean medical histories showing zero mental issues. He broke down the entire nasty process of forging government documents step by step. He painted a super vivid picture of that insane moment when the coach ordered them to throw the game. Photos of these healthy dudes smiling with their stolen gold medals instantly went viral across the entire planet. A global scandal of unimaginable proportions violently erupted. The international sports media went completely berserk with righteous fury. Major news networks urgently cut off their regular programming. Seasoned anchors were reading snippets of his article with voices literally shaking from pure shock. The general public was frozen in a state of deep, paralyzing disbelief. Regular folks straight up refused to believe that humans could sink to such a demonic level. The phone lines at the Spanish Sports Federation were melting down from thousands of angry callers. Massive corporate sponsors panicked and shredded their highly lucrative contracts overnight. High-ranking sports ministers cowardly locked themselves in their offices to dodge relentless reporters. They absolutely refused to give any on-camera statements. The police immediately launched a massive criminal probe into the fraud. The terrifying hour of reckoning had finally arrived. The Spanish players left their hometown as untouchable kings, but they came crawling back as despised and pathetic outcasts. There were no flowers or hype music waiting for them at the airport arrivals gate. Instead, they were ambushed by massive mobs of violently angry paparazzi. The towering athletes cowardly hid their faces deep inside their hoodies. They pathetically used their gym bags to block the blinding flashes of 100 cameras. They scurried to their getaway cars like cheap little shoplifters. They were not laughing or smiling anymore. You could see them visibly shaking from primal fear and infinite embarrassment. Their names were permanently etched into the global hall of shame. They were forced to hand their stolen gold medals back in absolute disgrace. They cowardly mailed the hardware back to the international committee using standard cheap shipping. These giant hulking men did not even have an ounce of courage to apologize in person. Exhausting court battles dragged on for several agonizing years, but the justice system ended up being completely blind and totally useless. The main masterminds behind this horrifying scam easily dodged hard prison time. The formerly powerful head of the Federation walked away with a hilariously tiny fine. The dirty politicians paid the government a few measly €1,000. They kept their precious freedom and their lavish lifestyles completely intact. The massive government funding completely vanished from the Federation vault forever. A super important state program designed to help real disabled hoopers was totally shut down for years. Spanish professional sports was covered in a thick, permanent layer of dirt. But right now, we need to ask ourselves the most important question of all. Who really took the heaviest loss in this whole disgusting mess? Who caught the deepest emotional scar that will never heal? The slimy bureaucrats just switched up their job titles and moved on. The fake players laid low for a bit and went right back to their normal lives. The actual, genuine victims of this nightmare were left stranded in the dark. Think back to the official roster of that Spanish basketball squad. Remember those two actual guys with heavily documented cognitive issues? They were 100% disabled from the day they were born. They knew absolutely nothing about this massive, toxic lie. Every single time they stepped onto the hardwood, they played with pure hearts. They fought tooth and nail for every single shot. They believed in their historic, epic victory with every fiber of their being. They ugly cried from pure joy while standing on that championship podium.
They were incredibly proud of their heavy, well-earned medals.
They honestly thought they pulled off a miracle despite their harsh conditions. And then, on one dark, cursed day, their fragile little world was violently ripped apart. Their beautiful, innocent fairy tale was aggressively snatched away from them. Cold-hearted adults sat them down and told them the brutal reality. They were told their big win was nothing but a huge pile of stinking garbage. They had to use their own shaking hands to give back their medals because of the bottomless greed of another person. These vulnerable guys had the absolute brightest moment of their difficult lives permanently stolen from them. And please never forget about the honest athletes from all the other countries, like that fiercely loyal Russian squad or the incredibly tough Polish team. The real, authentic disabled guys who got brutally bullied on the court by healthy liars. These struggling folks grinded for years through unbearable pain.
They heroically fought through intense physical agony every single day.
They bravely battled their birth defects. They showed up for the ultimate test of their incredibly hard lives. And they got violently stomped into the dirt just so some suits could make a quick buck. They flew back home with their hearts completely shattered into a million pieces. They permanently lost their faith in human justice and basic decency. That Spanish team did not just steal a piece of metal. They permanently assassinated the very concept of miracles. They ruthlessly murdered the hopes of millions of disabled people worldwide. They turned a legendary movement into a cheap, filthy clown show. They clearly proved a terrifying truth to the entire world. There is absolutely no cap on human greed and animalistic hunger for money. There is no rock bottom when it comes to human toxicity and random cruelty. People will do absolutely anything for a fat stack of crisp bills. They will happily crush the weakest and most defenseless people without thinking twice. They will spit right in the faces of those who cannot fight back. This disgusting saga will forever remain the darkest stain on the conscience of the global sports community. It is a bitter reality check. It is way too easy to ruin the life of another person, all for the simple sound of clinking coins. Justice is dead.